Thanks for joining us. I'm Rick Casey. We begin our broadcast with Texas Tribune's Evan Smith's report from Austin. Evan, for decades, Texas legislators have been able largely to duck the incendiary issue of abortion. This week, however, the issue was front and center. How were they able to do that for all those years, to avoid it, and what's changed?
You're exactly right about that. You know, there was a lot of smoke, but not much fire on the abortion issue because the votes were not there. Even in the high watermark of Tom Craddock's era as Speaker with the Republicans at 88 votes, they still could not manage to get enough to pass a lot of legislation that many of the more conservative elements, including your own former State Representative Frank Court, was very eager to pass legislation restricting the legal right of abortion. They couldn't do it. This week, Thursday specifically, was, in the parlance of that children's book, the terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day for abortion providers and for abortion supporters, in that both the abortion sonogram bill passed the Senate and Attorney General Greg Abbott issued a ruling that would allow the state's Health and Human Services Commission to restrict funding for Planned Parenthood. On the sonogram bill, you know, Rick, the deal is that Senator Dan Patrick of Houston, who is quite conservative, has carried a bill that would require doctors to perform a sonogram before a woman gets an abortion. Now, the woman can opt out of hearing or seeing the sonogram, but the doctor is required to describe the sonogram and the fetus to the woman. And, you know, abortion supporters believe this is unnecessary. It's a mandate on doctors. It's an invasion into what ought to be a very personal relationship between a doctor and her, a woman and her doctor. But the votes are there in the Senate, and the votes are especially there in the House, which now has 101 Republicans, most of them very conservative.
And Dan Patrick says he's merely empowering women. How does he make that argument?
Women think a little differently about that. Women think that if you tell them what they have to do, you're not empowering them, you're taking away their power. But that's an argument that voters and others can decide out in the policy arena. But Dan Patrick thinks he's empowering women by giving them information that they need to make a thoughtful decision. That, of course, assumes that a woman who goes in to get an abortion hasn't been thinking about the ramifications of it in advance. So, you know, there are some women who hear Dan Patrick say that and they think that's ridiculous.
Now, the Attorney General's ruling, make it
Right.
clear, Planned Parenthood has not been getting funding for abortions, I'm sure.
Well, no, but Planned Parenthood has received through the state's women's health program. Planned Parenthood clinics, 40 of them since 2007, have received $17.6 million from the Women's Health Program. There's been a rule on the books that the Health and Human Services Commission of the state of Texas has had that would have given them the opportunity to defund affiliates of abortion providers, but there was some concern about the constitutionality of it, so they basically allowed the law to stand on the books without enforcing it. And Greg Abbott's ruling yesterday gives now the HHSC the clearance to, first of all, say that any affiliate of an abortion provider cannot receive money from the Women's Health Program, and second, that they can define the word affiliate as they want. This really does give license to what has been a move by Senator Bob Deuel of Greenville, Republican in the Senate. He's wanted to defund Planned Parenthood clinics from the Women's Health Program for many years, and now the HHSC has clearance to do it, and so it looks like on top of the abortion sonogram bill, choice supporters are going to have to endure the elimination of funding from the Women's Health Program for Planned Parenthood clinics, even those that don't directly provide abortions. Many of them just do family planning or even just women's health services in rural areas. They're all now going to be subject to this rule, and all that money will be stripped from the Women's Health Program.
And obviously that was to help with presumably low-income women. Who is going to pay for the sonograms?
Well, that's a great question. You know, I've asked many people this. You know, are doctors simply going to incur the cost of this themselves? Are they going to outsource this to pregnancy resource centers? Are women going to have to pay for this? I mean, there's got to be a fiscal note attached, if not literally, then in theory, someone has to bear the cost. Now, a lot of the conservatives in the legislature who this time are saying, we're not going to support anything with a fiscal note, we think the state spends too much. If you ask many of those same conservatives, what if this abortion sonogram bill costs something? What if it had a fiscal note? Oh, we'd still vote for that, they say. And then you say, well, is that hypocritical? If you're concerned about spending, you want to spend money on this. No, we think this is too important. We would spend money on it.
Yeah, I would expect that the cost probably will go to the women themselves.
Well, it may ultimately land with the women. That's right.
Evan Smith from the Texas Tribune. Evan, thank you very much.
Thank you, Rick.
We've set up a link to the Texas Tribune website. Just go to klrn.org/TexasWeek.